History loves to glamorize criminal masterminds. But what about the absolute clowns? Today, we're diving into the most absurd, ridiculous, and jaw-droppingly dumb smuggling attempts ever recorded in the US. From cows with fake humps to torpedoes full of whiskey. This isn't just crime, it's performance art. Unintentionally. 1. During the peak of Prohibition, when getting a drink was illegal, some aspiring criminals looked at a field of cows and had what they thought was a billion-dollar idea. Their plan? To create fake, hollow humps, fill them with whiskey, and strap them onto the backs of cows to walk them across the border. The logic was that federal agents would be too busy looking for gangsters in fancy cars to notice a herd of lumpy, sloshing camel cows. This plan had several minor flaws, the most obvious being that cows famously do not have humps. Any border agent with even a kindergarten-level knowledge of farm animals would immediately find something suspicious about a creature that looked like it lost a fight with a waterbed. It's a bold strategy, assuming the Border Patrol had never actually seen a real cow before. 2. Let's travel back to the Civil War, a time of great national conflict and, apparently, terrible culinary decisions. Confederate sympathizers needed to smuggle gunpowder to the South, and they devised a plan that was almost clever. They decided to hide the highly flammable black powder inside sausages, figuring that casings of processed meat were the perfect, inconspicuous camouflage. The plan was flawless, except for one tiny, explosive detail. Gunpowder goes boom, and sausages are often cooked over an open flame. The entire scheme came to a fiery end when one of the smugglers, probably getting a bit hungry, accidentally dropped a gunpowder-filled sausage into a campfire. The resulting meaty, smoky explosion not only exposed the operation, but also probably ruined everyone's appetite for breakfast. 3. If you thought the cow plan was weird, Florida would like you to hold its beer, or rather, its alligator. During Prohibition, some of the most audacious smugglers in the Sunshine State developed a plan that was equal parts genius and insanity. They would capture alligators, sedate them, or use recently deceased ones, and then stuff their stomachs with bottles of booze before shipping them north. The logic was beautifully simple and terrifying. No customs official in their right mind would voluntarily perform an amateur gastrectomy on a multi-hundred-pound reptile, conscious or not. It's a plan that relies entirely on intimidation and the universal human desire to not stick your hand down an alligator's throat. A truly jaw-dropping idea in every sense of the word. 4. When you think of a funeral procession, you think of solemnity, respect, and quiet grief. During Prohibition, however, smugglers saw it as the perfect cover. They would stage elaborate, fake funerals complete with a hearse, mourning family members dressed in black, and a beautiful, ornate casket. The only thing missing was an actual body. Instead, the coffin would be filled to the brim with bottles of illegal whiskey, rum, and gin. The sheer audacity of this plan often worked, as most law enforcement officers were hesitant to disrespect the dead by demanding to inspect a casket. However, the scheme would sometimes fall apart when a clumsy pallbearer would trip, filling the silent, respectful air with the distinct sound of hundreds of shattering glass bottles. 5. So, you need to move a truck full of illegal booze, but you're worried about inspections. What's the best deterrent you can think of? A weapon? A clever hiding spot? No, according to some Prohibition-era geniuses, the answer was bees. Thousands of them. The plan, known as the beekeeper's gambit, involved loading a vehicle with crates of liquor and then placing several active, buzzing beehives on top of the illicit cargo. The idea was that no inspector would dare to dig through the shipment for fear of being swarmed by a furious cloud of stinging insects. It was a brilliant deterrent, in theory. The problem was that bees aren't exactly loyal employees, and a bumpy road could anger them just as easily, often turning on the smugglers themselves in a painful, buzzing failure. 6. In the long and storied history of aviation, the humble pigeon has served as a messenger, a symbol of peace, and for a brief, idiotic moment during Prohibition, a tiny feathered booze mule. Some smugglers decided to use homing pigeons as their rum runners, strapping tiny, custom-made flasks filled with concentrated alcohol to their legs. The plan was to release them from Canada or from ships offshore and have them fly their precious cargo to a specific location in the United States. The critical flaw in this plan, however, is that pigeons work for no one. The birds, it turned out, were not loyal employees and would frequently get tired, lost, or simply decide to land in a random person's backyard, delivering their high-proof package to a very surprised and suddenly very happy civilian. 7. The coconut is nature's perfect container, tough, waterproof, and full of delicious milk. Some smugglers looked at it and thought, "We can do better." Their incredibly labor-intensive scheme involved importing thousands of coconuts, drilling a small, precise hole in each one, draining the natural milk, and then painstakingly refilling the empty shell with high-proof rum. After the coconut was filled with booze, the hole would be meticulously sealed with wax and disguised. While brilliant on paper, the sheer amount of work required was astronomical. Furthermore, the plan often failed when a single coconut would leak, alerting customs agents with the unmistakable aroma of a tropical cocktail and turning a clever import business into a very sticky and very illegal situation. 8. The ingenuity of smugglers truly knows no bounds, sometimes extending to their own bodies, or at least their prosthetic limbs. A surprisingly common trick during Prohibition involved people with hollow prosthetic legs turning them into personal portable flasks. They would simply fill up their artificial limb with whiskey or gin, put on their pants, and attempt to walk casually across a border or past a police checkpoint. This plan, however, had a very distinct auditory flaw. Many of these smugglers were caught because customs agents noticed a strange, rhythmic sloshing or squishing sound with every step they took. It's incredibly difficult to look inconspicuous when your leg sounds like a walking waterbed, announcing your illegal secret to everyone within earshot. 9. In the world of crime, a good distraction can be the difference between success and a long prison sentence. One smuggler, who had clearly watched too many movies, decided the ultimate distraction was to stage a life-threatening medical emergency. His plan was to approach the customs checkpoint and then launch into an Oscar-worthy performance of a sudden, catastrophic heart attack, complete with dramatic chest clutching, theatrical gasping, and a slow, agonizing collapse onto the floor. The theory was that as every agent rushed to his aid, consumed with concern for his well-being, his partners in crime could simply ghost past the checkpoint with all their contraband. The monumental flaw in this logic is that a man potentially dying in a federal facility doesn't make guards less attentive. It makes them more attentive. Instead of creating a window of opportunity, it triggers a full-scale lockdown, bringing in paramedics, more police, and a lot of official paperwork for every single person in the vicinity, especially the nervous-looking guys holding the suspicious bags. 10. Hiding diamonds is a delicate art, and one smuggler believed he had found the perfect, if pungent, hiding place: a massive artisanal wheel of cheese. The idea itself wasn't entirely terrible, as few customs agents are trained as master fromagers. However, the plan completely fell apart due to the smuggler's total inability to act natural. Instead of behaving like a proud cheese merchant, he treated the dairy product like it was the nuclear launch codes. He was a nervous, sweating disaster, his eyes darting around every time an agent walked by. He would flinch if someone got too close to his precious cargo and carried it with the terrified delicacy of a man transporting nitroglycerin. His body language didn't just suggest he was hiding something, it screamed it. The agents, picking up on his absurdly suspicious behavior, decided to investigate his cheese, slicing it open to find the most valuable and least delicious cheese filling in history. 11. In a desperate bid for sympathy, some smugglers turned to the classic sick day excuse. Their method involved filling a rubber hot water bottle not with hot water, but with pure, unadulterated gin. Cradling the bottle against their stomach and putting on their most pathetic, pained expression, they would attempt to convince agents they were far too ill to be properly searched. This plan, however, failed to account for one of the most basic human senses: smell. Gin doesn't have the neutral scent of vodka. It has the overwhelming, unmistakable aroma of a juniper forest. These smugglers didn't smell sick. They smelled like a walking, talking botanical cocktail. Any agent with a working nose could immediately detect that the only illness present was a severe case of carrying contraband that reeked like a high-end liquor cabinet. 12. For the smuggler who finds a prosthetic leg too subtle, may we present the rubber overshoe bladder. This was a marvel of terrible criminal engineering. Enormous, floppy rubber galoshes that had been fitted with secret internal compartments for holding alcohol. The wearer would fill their clown-sized shoes with whiskey and then attempt to walk with a straight face through customs. This bold fashion statement was immediately defeated by the simple laws of acoustics. It is physically impossible to walk in liquid-filled shoes without making a noise. Every single step produced a symphony of squishing, sloshing, and squelching sounds that announced their presence from 50 feet away. It was the auditory equivalent of wearing a giant neon sign that read, "Please inspect my hilariously loud and suspicious footwear." 13. The walking cane flask was meant to project an image of class and sophistication, a clever gentleman spy hiding his vice in plain sight. For the average Prohibition-era smuggler, however, it was an absolute comedy of errors. The primary issue was that these canes were often poorly made and ridiculously prone to failure at the worst possible moments. A simple stumble on a curb could pop the top, sending a fountain of incriminating booze all over the sidewalk. Some were caught after accidentally leaning on their cane too hard, causing the mechanism to fail and drenching their pants in whiskey. The attempt to look suave and clever instantly evaporated the moment their stylish accessory malfunctioned, transforming them from a cunning rogue into a clumsy amateur standing in a puddle of their own contraband. 14. Leveraging the social norms of the era, female smugglers often turned to the garter flask, a flat container designed to be strapped to the upper thigh and concealed beneath a skirt. This was meant to be the ultimate stealthy accessory, hidden away where a gentleman officer would never dare to look. But the practical application was far from seamless. The flasks, often made of glass or metal, had a tendency to clank together when walking, creating a subtle but distinct clink-clink sound that would betray their existence. Even worse was the constant threat of gravity. A loose strap or a sudden movement could send a flask of gin sliding down a woman's leg, exiting from under her hem, and skittering across the floor of the customs office, coming to a halt at the feet of a very confused and now very suspicious agent. 15. Here is a plan born from the kind of logic that only makes sense late at night after a few drinks. What if you hid the alcohol by freezing it inside a massive block of ice? Some smugglers took this idea and ran with it, placing bottles of valuable whiskey inside a large vat of water and freezing it solid. They would then try to pass it off as a simple delivery of ice for a restaurant or hotel. This turned every smuggling run into a frantic race against the sun. The smugglers were not just dodging the law, they were fighting the fundamental principles of thermodynamics. A traffic jam, a detour, or an unexpectedly warm day became a complete disaster, as their perfect, opaque block of ice would slowly begin to melt, gradually revealing the glass bottles suspended within like prehistoric insects in amber. 16. Why smuggle bottle by bottle when you can think like an industrialist? This was the thinking behind the garden hose alcohol pipeline. In an act of incredible ambition, some smuggling syndicates ran a common garden hose across the US-Canada border, typically under the shallow waters of a river. One end in a Canadian distillery, the other in an American safe house, they could pump a continuous flow of liquor across the border. The glaring weakness was their choice of equipment. A cheap rubber garden hose is not designed to withstand constant water pressure, underwater currents, and debris. These makeshift pipelines frequently ruptured, creating spectacular geysers of whiskey in the middle of the river, alerting authorities and likely making the local fish population very, very happy. 17. The friendly neighborhood milkman was once a symbol of wholesome small-town America. During Prohibition, however, at least one of them decided to diversify his product line. This particular entrepreneur used his daily delivery route as the perfect cover, replacing the creamy milk in his classic metal churns with potent, illegal moonshine. For a while, it was a brilliant business model, hiding in plain sight. But the plan curdled when he inevitably mixed up his orders. An unsuspecting family, expecting a healthy splash of milk for their morning cereal, instead got a pitcher full of high-proof alcohol. The subsequent complaint to the dairy wasn't about the delivery being late, it was about the milk having a funny taste, and making Daddy sing and dance on the kitchen table after breakfast, leading to a swift and embarrassing end for the boozy milkman. 18. Chicago gangsters during Prohibition were known for their ambition, but sometimes that ambition far outstripped their engineering skills. In a bold move to control the booze supply from Canada across Lake Michigan, a crime syndicate commissioned the construction of their very own smuggling submarine. This wasn't a sleek military-grade vessel. It was a clunky, homemade contraption designed with one purpose in mind. The dream was to silently glide beneath the waves, invisible to the Coast Guard. The reality was a complete fiasco. The submarine was poorly designed, leaked constantly, and was fundamentally unseaworthy. It barely managed to submerge before it became clear it was more of a coffin than a cargo ship. The ambitious underwater operation sank before it ever made a single, illegal delivery, proving that being a gangster doesn't automatically make you a naval architect. 19. If a submarine was too complex, how about something simpler, dumber, and far more explosive? Across the Detroit River, which separates the USA and Canada, some smugglers devised what they called the torpedo system. These weren't actual military torpedoes, but large, hollowed-out metal cylinders that they would pack with bottles of Canadian whiskey. They'd then attach a small motor and launch these booze-filled projectiles across the river, aiming for an accomplice waiting on the American side. The execution was a complete disaster. Most of the torpedoes were poorly weighted, causing them to immediately sink to the bottom of the river. The few that did manage to stay afloat were often pushed off course by the current, ending up miles downstream or, even more embarrassingly, circling back to the Canadian side. It was less of a smuggling operation and more of a very inefficient way to donate whiskey to the riverbed. 20. The humble egg. A breakfast staple, a symbol of new life, and, for a brief, bizarre period, a tiny, fragile container for illegal booze. This incredibly tedious scheme required smugglers to poke a minuscule hole in an eggshell, carefully blow out all the natural contents, and then use a syringe to refill the hollow shell with high-proof spirits. The tiny hole would then be sealed with a speck of wax, and the egg would be placed back in a carton to be sold. Besides being absurdly time-consuming for such a small payoff, the plan was a structural nightmare. Eggshells are famously fragile. Many shipments were lost when a carton was jostled, resulting in a crate full of broken shells and the overwhelming smell of an alcoholic omelet, a dead giveaway to any inspector who wasn't a complete yoke. 21. Taking their cues from meteorologists, some high-flying smugglers on the Canadian border developed a plan that was truly up in the air. They would attach small, well-wrapped packages of valuable liquor to weather balloons and release them, hoping the prevailing winds would carry them across the border to a designated drop zone where their associates were waiting. The fatal flaw in this atmospheric scheme was, of course, the weather itself. Wind is notoriously unpredictable and does not care about your illegal business venture. More often than not, the balloons were blown completely off course, dropping their alcoholic payloads in random farm fields, on top of police stations, or in the backyards of law-abiding citizens who were suddenly gifted a very special delivery from the heavens. 22. In the late 19th century, San Francisco's port was a bustling hub of international trade, and with that came creative attempts to smuggle opium. One of the more artistic, yet ultimately foolish schemes involved hiding the drug inside ornate, traditional Chinese lanterns. The smugglers would pack the opium deep within the intricate paper and bamboo structures, believing that the beauty and cultural significance of the lanterns would prevent close inspection. However, customs agents quickly became wise to the trick. They realized that these particular lanterns felt unusually heavy and dense. The plan was exposed when an agent, likely frustrated by the weight, simply tore one of the delicate lanterns open, showering his desk not with festive confetti, but with a large quantity of illegal narcotics. 23. This next one is a true masterpiece of criminal creativity and technical failure. Smugglers attempting to import opium came up with a genuinely novel idea. They would press the raw opium resin with other materials to create what looked and felt exactly like phonograph records. They could then be shipped in standard record sleeves, looking for all the world like the latest musical hits from abroad. It was a brilliant disguise, but it had one crippling weakness. A customs agent might actually want to listen to the music. When a suspicious agent placed one of these opium platters on a turntable, it obviously didn't produce a beautiful melody. Instead, the needle would either get stuck or carve a silent, sticky groove through the compressed drug, instantly revealing the record's true, non-musical nature. 24. They say nothing is sacred, and for Prohibition-era smugglers, that included the Holy Bible. A common and sacrilegious tactic was to take a thick Bible, carve out a rectangular cavity in the center of its pages, and create a custom-made hiding spot for a small flask of whiskey. The smugglers operated on the pious assumption that no God-fearing customs agent would dare to desecrate a holy book by rifling through its pages. For a time, this worked. But as the trick became more common, agents got less hesitant. They developed a simple test. They would just pick up the suspicious Bible and shake it. The sound of a glass flask rattling around inside the Word of God was a pretty clear sign that this particular book contained more spirits than just the Holy One. 25. This scheme is a dark and absurd stain on American history, showcasing a grotesque attempt to circumvent the 1808 Act prohibiting importation of slaves. Some vile captains tried to exploit loopholes with arguments so dumb they are truly shocking. One of the most infamous tactics was to claim that the enslaved people on their ships were not cargo, but simply members of the crew, despite them being chained in the hold. An even more bizarre and tragic justification came from slavers operating on the African coast, who would engage in a twisted form of trade by exchanging human beings for stacks of Bibles. They would then claim they were not illegally buying people, but were engaged in a noble, civilizing mission. This paper-thin and morally bankrupt excuse was a disgusting attempt to mask pure human greed with a flimsy veil of religious piety, a scheme as dumb in its logic as it was evil in its intent. 26. The simple loaf of bread. Warm, comforting, and, for some Prohibition smugglers, a potential hiding place. The plan was as straightforward as it was flawed. A bootlegger would take a large, crusty loaf of bread, slice it in half, hollow out the soft interior, and place a bottle of booze inside before carefully putting the two halves back together. It looked like a perfect loaf from the outside, ready for a picnic. The problem was that customs and police inspectors weren't just looking, they were also touching. Their inspection method for suspicious bread was incredibly simple and effective. They would just give it a good squeeze. A normal loaf of bread compresses. A loaf of bread with a hard glass bottle inside does not. The moment an agent felt that unyielding resistance, the baker's game was up. His brilliant plan crushed like a cheap dinner roll. 27. Con artists will exploit any angle, including faith. One of the most audacious roles a smuggler could play was that of a priest. A man would don the full clerical vestments, adopt a pious demeanor, and attempt to transport his goods under the guise of holy duty. His prized possession was a large container labeled holy water for a supposed church ceremony. Of course, the container wasn't filled with blessed water. It was brimming with pure grain alcohol. This ruse depended entirely on the authorities being too intimidated or respectful to question a man of the cloth. But a skeptical agent who decided to take a small, cautious sniff of the holy water would be met not with the scent of sanctity, but with the powerful, unmistakable fumes of a distillery, leading to a swift fall from grace for the fake father. 28. Musicians on tour often travel with large, bulky, and oddly shaped instrument cases, making them the perfect, unsuspecting mules for contraband. Smugglers would exploit this by hiding their illegal goods inside all manner of musical equipment. A hollow-body guitar could hold a surprising number of small packages. A large double bass offered a cavernous hiding space, and even the shell of a bass drum could be filled with illicit items. This seemed like a solid plan until the smugglers encountered an inspector who was also a musician. An agent with a trained ear might ask the musician to play a little something. The resulting moment of panic, as the fraud who has never held an instrument in his life tries to explain why he can't play his own guitar, was often the final discordant note in their short-lived smuggling career. 29. The lumber industry has long been a part of trade between the US and Canada, and some smugglers saw the massive timber rafts floating down rivers as their golden opportunity. Their incredibly labor-intensive plan was to take large, thick logs, hollow out their centers like giant wooden canoes, and then pack the cavities with hundreds of bottles of whiskey. The logs would then be sealed up and floated across the border as part of a legitimate lumber shipment. This was a high-risk, high-reward strategy. It required immense effort, and if even one log wasn't sealed perfectly, it could take on water and sink, taking a fortune in booze with it. More often, they were caught when an inspector, using a long metal spike to test the logs for rot, would be met with the unmistakable sound of shattering glass from deep within the wood. 30. Nothing seems more innocent than a child's toy, a fact that smugglers were all too willing to exploit. A particularly popular method involved using wooden toys, especially classic rocking horses or pull-along animal figures. These toys would be carefully constructed with hidden, hollow compartments inside their bodies. The secret chambers would be filled with narcotics or other contraband before the toy was painted and finished to look perfectly normal. The plan relied on the assumption that no customs agent would be heartless enough to break a child's plaything. However, agents noticed that some of these toys were unusually heavy for their size. All it took was one suspicious agent deciding to take a closer look, sometimes even drilling a small hole, to reveal the toy's illicit stuffing and end the twisted game. 31. When human smugglers fail, why not try to recruit an animal? In a truly desperate and bizarre scheme, people would use unwitting animals as their accomplices. This low-tech operation involved taking a family pet, like a dog or a cat, attaching a small package of contraband securely to its collar or a small harness, and then letting it wander across the border. An accomplice on the other side would then simply call the animal's name, and the furry courier would happily trot over, wagging its tail, completely unaware of its role in international crime. This plan was, to put it mildly, unreliable. Animals are not known for their punctuality or adherence to complex plans. Many a smuggling attempt failed when the dog decided to chase a squirrel, take a nap, or deliver its package to a friendly stranger instead of the intended recipient. 32. Birdwatching seems like a harmless hobby, but for one smuggler, it was the perfect cover for a highly illegal operation, trafficking rare and exotic bird eggs. This specialist would trek into remote wilderness areas to steal the eggs from protected species nests. To transport them, he wore a custom-made vest with dozens of softly padded pockets, each designed to hold a single, fragile egg. He would then pose as an innocent birdwatcher, complete with binoculars and a field guide. His downfall was not a clever customs agent, but his own 2 feet. While walking through an airport, he tripped and fell flat on his face. The impact resulted in a series of soft but distinct cracking sounds, followed by the slow, gooey trickle of dozens of rare, fertilized eggs soaking through his shirt. A truly messy and embarrassing end to his criminal enterprise. 33. There are some things in this world that people instinctively do not want to touch, and at the top of that list is a giant pile of someone else's dirty laundry. This universal sense of disgust was the entire foundation for one of the simplest and most pungent smuggling schemes ever devised. The plan was to place contraband, be it alcohol, narcotics, or untaxed goods, at the very bottom of a large laundry basket. Then, the smuggler would pile weeks' worth of their foulest, sweatiest, and most unpleasantly stained clothes on top, creating a formidable barrier of pure filth. The hope was that any customs agent, upon opening the basket and being hit with that first wave of overpowering odor, would recoil in horror and immediately wave it through rather than conduct a thorough search. It was a bold gamble on the squeamishness of federal employees, and while it may have worked a few times, it was inevitably foiled by a determined agent with a strong stomach and a distinct lack of a sense of smell. So here's the real question. Which is dumber, trying to smuggle opium as a vinyl record, or stuffing liquor into a loaf of Wonder Bread? Drop your pick in the comments and make your case. And hey, if human stupidity deserves a spotlight, hit like and subscribe. We've got plenty more where this came from.